All right, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back. Happy Monday to DFS Office Hours. Hope you guys all had a wonderful weekend. I actually had a little bit of a hot streak going on through most of the weekend here. Had a legitimate sweat in the NBA main slate on Friday night. Ended up having a pretty good finish overall there. Came down a bit from where I was at the peak, but a pretty good day overall on the NBA side. Skipped Saturday, was out doing stuff all day Saturday, and then had another pretty nice day on NFL yesterday. Was actually in the running to take down the $5 nickel, the $5 three max on DraftKings for a while. Which would have been a pretty nice hit overall. Fell down quite a bit there. The Hunter Renfrow catch at the end of the Raiders and football team, I guess, game there to give him the 100-yard bonus. Shot me way up on the standings. I was all hyped up, and then checked on the other games, and I saw that there were like 10 minutes left still in the Seahawks game and 6 minutes left in the other game. So I knew I was going to drop down quite a bit, but had a pretty good day overall there. And then had a sweat going in on the Sunday Night Showdown game as well for a while there too. So pretty good weekend of DFS for me here. Comes at the tail end, or hopefully the tail end here, of what has been a pretty long downswing. So hopefully this is the sign of things swinging back up. You don't even need things to swing back up for very long either. Oh, going a little blurry there. That's kind of the funny thing, especially with GPP plays. Like, you have these downswings. In reality, most of the time you're in a downswing, right? You're basically waiting for like the one day, the one slate where things swing back up, and then other always downswings, right? So unless you're just on a little bit of a heater, which is always nice, you get on those sometimes, but it's mostly just the nature of the game, bink or bleed, right? So, but anyway, welcome back. It is Monday here, which means we've got some fun stuff to do. We've got the weekly max challenge winners for this week, the giveaway, the spinny wheel, as somebody said in Slack over the weekend, which I appreciated. Always love the spinny wheel. And then of course we have some questions to answer here. It's been a full weekend of DFS and some questions to talk about here. So we will go over everything. We'll start it off with the weekly max challenge stuff, but as always, I will be answering questions here in roughly chronological order. So pop your questions into the chat, into either the Office Hours channel in Slack or into YouTube chat now. We do have 4 questions to talk about here at the start of the stream. So if you want your question answered early, or if you just want your conversation topic, I guess, talked about early here. Sometimes I feel a little funny always calling these questions because it's not, sometimes the way this show ends up going is it's not like I have a question and then Jordan provides the answer and that's the way it is. A lot of times I just like to, someone asks a question about correlation and then we talk about correlation. What is correlation in DFS? Why is it important? When is it less important? When is it more important? Right. So, but anyway, let's go ahead and get into it. Start jumping in here. So we will start it again with the weekly max challenge. It is now the end of week 13. Heading into week 14. I can't believe it. NFL always goes so fast. So I'm sure you guys know what we're talking about here. If you don't, I'll leave this up on screen while we're doing some of these announcements and you can get the idea. But, big picture, you wear the SaberSim logo, you max out the pooch part of a mini max, and we give you free stuff. So let's get into it. Our highest overall scorer this week in the DraftKings mini max was, with a 13th overall finish, was Shady Advice. Congratulations, Shady, winner of a $50 and $27 single entry contest ticket. Fits the red zone and the blind side in NFL very nicely. Free month of SaberSim and an entry to the private $5,000 free roll we're running at the end of the season. I know that end of the season is now starting to come up on us. At least it is on the radar. It's something that we're at least I kind of thinking about. So more info to come on those free rolls. I know people have started to ask. I'll talk to Andy and the rest of the team here and figure out exactly what that is all going to look like. But will basically just be a free entry, $5,000 prize pool on DraftKings. Includes all of the highest scoring winners for every week and also everybody that participated all season. So we'll figure out exactly about how many people are in there, but fun little free roll there. And congratulations, Shady Advice. I know there was quite a bit of a sweat for the winner, for this winner of the contest, but also just in general for the Minimax for SaberSim users this week. Saw a ton of logos up there through most of the slate yesterday. On the FanDuel side, a very impressive finish, third overall. So very, very close to that bink line there on the pooch punt was S1 Lopes. Congratulations, S1 Lopes, for you. $25 SaberSim credit along with a free entire month of SaberSim and an entry to the $1,000 free roll at the end of the season on the FanDuel side. Congratulations, S1 Lopes. Both of these winners this week have participated in every single week of the season, which is amazing. The entire reason, the whole way we put this contest together really was trying to encourage with goodies and stuff like that, people to use the contest selection and bankroll management principles that we always preach here. One of those being treating these seasons like a marathon and not a sprint, and participating every week, which is why there are prizes for people that do participate in this every single week. So it's really awesome to see two of our users here that have played every single week, participated in this contest every single week, end up with third and 13th here and get some extra cool stuff in addition to obviously whatever they won in these individual contests. So congratulations, guys. But next up, obviously, is the giveaway. So let's go ahead and get into that. Spinny wheel time. Let's go ahead and remove the names from last week and close our ad here, and we'll be good to go. This week on the DraftKings side, 57 names. 57 entrants. We're going to be pulling out 3 here for 150 tickets to next week's Minimax. You get to play the Minimax for free next week. We should be all caught up on tickets. If you guys have been waiting for your tickets, if you earned tickets in the giveaway or with the higher scoring thing and you're waiting for DraftKings tickets, you should have gotten them now. We are all caught up. Really appreciate you guys' patience as we got through the Thanksgiving holiday, and DraftKings was able to get caught up and get all of that taken care of. So we should be all caught up there. If you are not, if you did not receive tickets, shoot me an email, support@sabersim.com, or I guess not necessarily shoot me an email, shoot the whole support team an email. We'll figure out what is going on there, but should be all caught up. So anyway, enough talking here. 3 winners this week. Let's do it. Week 13. Who do we got? Oh, all right. This is my moment. Noop Masaka, right? I think that's how I was told to pronounce it. I believe that's our guy Nacho Man here. Noop Masaka. I think that's from this was written out phonetically for me, so I should have been practicing this, but I think I got it right there. Congratulations, 150 free tickets for next week's Minimax. Yes, I did get it right. All right, perfect. My flashcards, my phonetic flashcards for everybody's usernames here are coming in clutch. So, all right, winner number 2. Let's get it. Clay, 357. Congratulations, Clay. All right, and our third winner on the DraftKings side for this week is Rusty Trombone, another username that is definitely run a little hot on these giveaways. So congratulations, Rusty Trombone, our 3 winners on the DraftKings side. Noop Masaka, Clay 357, and Rusty Trombone, all winning free tickets to next week's Minimax. And of course, one more congratulations to Shady Advice for the highest finish this week in the Minimax. We'll get you guys written down there. Get an email from me before the end of the day about letting you know if you won. I always say that, and then I don't know why I said that. The purpose of sending the emails for anybody that doesn't watch this video here to see if they won. And if you weren't here watching it now, then it wouldn't be very helpful. Whatever. Anyway, let's go ahead and jump into the FanDuel side here and keep it going. All right, so on FanDuel, 10 spins of the wheel. 60 entrants overall. And we'll pull 10 winners. So 1 in 6 shot here. Sky Murray said, damn, I cannot win this at all. I know with the true random spin here, you can definitely be on the wrong side of variance, just like you can with DFS. Best advice I can give is if your bankroll supports it, play on both sites here. Make sure you're playing every single week. Give yourself as many opportunities as possible to take it down. But let's go ahead and get into this. Spin number 1 on the FanDuel side, 60 entrants. All is looking good here. And let's do it. That was quite a spin. Right on the edge. Kelvin Dubs takes it down. Congratulations, Kelvin. Spin number 2. And this is for $7.50 in SaberSim credit here. Oh, right on the edge again. This time it's Albus. Congratulations, Albus. We do hope in the future to get something set up with FanDuel to actually give this out with tickets, because I know it's more exciting there. But was a little bit tricky getting that set up with them for this season. So, oh, Baby Jordan gets some retribution there. Missed it on the second pull, wins it on the third. Big PLC. Congratulations, Big PLC. Winner number 5. Ron King, 198. Congratulations, Ron. And our number 6 winner here. Hook'em 44. Number 7. Daily Big Kahuna takes down spot number 7 here. It's the Phantom 1. 2 more for this week, and then we put to rest another week of the Weekly Max Challenge. Moose 2016. Congratulations, Moose. And our last one for this week, the final winner of week 13. Is Tamakas. I think that's another one that I think I've been told how to pronounce, and I'm pretty sure it's Tamakas. Congratulations, regardless. Our 10 winners this week: Kelvin Dubs, Albus, Baby Jordan, Big PLC, Ron King 198, Hook'em 44, Daily Big Kahuna, the Phantom 1, Moose 2016, Tamakas, and one last congratulations to S1 Lopes for the 3rd place overall finish. All of our FanDuel winners. Nice work. Congratulations this week. Let's go ahead and get this list written down on my end. So I've got it. And we will go ahead and go from there. Cool. So we'll transition here now. We'll jump into some questions, answer you guys' questions that have come in here this morning and on stream. Let's go ahead and shut down the wheel of names here. For some reason, it felt like there was something else I was supposed to do there, but I think that is about it. Let's go ahead and start jumping into some questions here. So let's see. I've got a handful of questions that came in through the Office Hours channel in Slack. I see a few questions that have come through live. Got a couple questions that are in the support inbox. So we will get to everything. Let's go ahead and start here. This actually came in last week, and I apologize. This is from Casey Luss, so I apologize that this didn't get. We probably should have answered this over the weekend. So Casey, I'm sorry about that, but we'll get to you now. And he said, I forgot how Max said to enter, say, 2 contests, both over 50K entrants. GPP on DK. Should I have SaberSim build 40 entries or just 20, entering each one twice? Asking because I had SaberSim build 40 lineups, then entered the 2 contests last night. One did okay, but the other did not cash. I filled using unique, so the total entries match my total lineup number 40. Okay, so question: you're playing 240, you're playing 220 maxes. Should you fill with unique or rank? You want a unique lineup in every single contest, or do you want the same lineup in every single contest, the same 20 in both contests? In general, we recommend most of you guys fill these uniquely. So what that means is building 40 lineups, KC, exactly as you did, using the unique fill method in the entry editor and filling your lineups uniquely. Now, so as always, right, I don't want to come up here and just say, this is the way it is. This is what you should do. I want to explain why. So the reason why we generally explain to do that is that it is going to lower your variance, right? It is going to give you a better just raw probability of building a high upside, maybe top 1% lineup because you have 40 unique lineups instead of 20, right? It is going to lower your variance. It is going to give you the ability to place a lineup high in the contest just more often, just on a pure probability level, assuming that your overall strategy of building lineups is relatively consistent. Now, what you sacrifice there, right? Because pretty much anything you're going to do in DFS to increase one lever, a lot of times you're going to have to decrease another lever. You make sacrifices to build out a DFS process. What you sacrifice is really raw upside, or you sacrifice potentially your highest possible ROI, right? And what I mean by that is that you have, at the very least, variance in this particular lineup set of your best lineup could be in your lower dollar entry contest, right? If you're playing the and one in the quarter jukebox, which I think is pretty common, I see that combination a lot. I play both of those contests pretty much every single night. If your best lineup is in the quarter jukebox and maybe you win the contest, right? And that lineup could have, by pure luck, also just been in the and one, you're going to have a lower ROI, even though you still won, right? It's probably still a very profitable night. You're still going to recoup some of that expected value. And that lineup maybe wouldn't have even been in your pool at all if you only built 20. It could be in the lower contest, right? Which does, over the long term, especially thinking about playing these slates out, 1,000 times or something like that, you're probably going to have a lower ROI on average, right? The expected value of individual lineups actually goes down because they can be in, by pure randomness, be in the contest that pays out less. But still, it's going to lower your variance. It's going to spread out your risk. The contest selection and bankroll management principles that we preach kind of go together. They're kind of paired. So when we say play 5% maximum of your bankroll on any given slate, it is with the assumption that you are playing in a way to lower your variance as much as possible and using something like the unique fill. If you told me you were playing 20 lineups and filling them rank and putting the same 20 in both contests and basically just doubling down on those lineups, I would probably encourage you to actually scale back some of your bankroll investment a little bit to kind of counteract the additional variance you're adding into your lineup portfolio, right? You've increased the variance, so you should decrease maybe your investment a little bit on a per slate basis since you're playing for that higher upside. So anyway, long story short, I think average in general, best practice advice I would give is continue filling these uniquely. Be willing to just eat some of the variance of having the lineup show up in the lower dollar contest. It can work out the other way too. Like it can work out in your favor as well. Where lineup 39 just by pure chance ends up in the and one, the higher dollar contest in this particular case. And you wouldn't have even built that lineup had you just entered 20 lineups, period. And by sheer luck, it ended up in the right contest, right? It can work out in your favor too, but it does in general, theoretically, lower your upside over the long term. But good question there. I do think, since you mentioned Max's name here, if you had watched his video here, this one under the MBA course, the penultimate lesson in the course with Max walking through his MBA process. Oh, this one. He uses a rank fill when he's filling his lineups for this particular slate on both sites. That is because Max recognizes this and is okay eating a little bit of additional variance, introducing a little bit of variance on a slate-to-slate basis to intentionally get higher upside and intentionally double down on his highest Saber score lineups in the pool. So that's why I don't want to ever give anybody the impression that we're contradicting ourselves or wishy-washy on this stuff, right? It's a balance. It's what you are really looking for. And in this video, Max is using the rank fill method because that's what he's trying to do. He's okay eating a little bit of additional variance to maximize upside and ROI, and that's what he does. But good question. Let's move it along here. Process kind of question here from Jared. We'll do a quick tutorial on this one. And he said, Jordan, could you go over what someone would need to do if they wanted to play the early slate and the main slate, in particularly NFL? I think it would be helpful for all of us to see how it's done. Yesterday, I was playing some contests on the early slate as I was the main on FanDuel. It took me a few tries that you have to download the templates from each slate separately and put them in the entry editor separately as well to be filled. Yeah, a little tricky there. So we'll do a quick demo of this. I'm glad you mentioned FanDuel because I think it's more confusing on FanDuel. So let's get into it. So we can't do the NFL slate because we don't have entry editor files for the upcoming NFL slate because I'm not entered into next week's NFL slate yet. We'll do NBA. It'll still work. So what we'll do, so the question overall here is like, I'm playing the main slate, right? And let's just say maybe I'm also playing the express slate. We'll do this for the example, the 7:30 express slate. So let's first, I'm going to enter here quickly. Let's do this. We'll do it on the screen. I am entered for the main slate on FanDuel tonight, but I don't actually play these short slates too often. So I don't think I'm entered there, but we can enter. We can quickly do that. So I'm going to just enter something really small here for the purposes of this. We'll just do the single entry. Okay. And let's actually put like a lineup in here. Maybe I'll actually play this just for fun. Sometimes when I enter these contests on stream, I feel like I always try to like not put a significant portion of my bankroll in if I wasn't going to play the contest anyway. But it feels a little cursed to withdraw from the contest after the fact. I don't know why. Wait, what am I doing? What other positions do I need? I need to stop talking and focus on just filling out this lineup. This is supposed to be simple. 74. I do like that FanDuel makes this so easy to just see what positions you still have left filled. Okay, cool. So we'll play the little $2 single entry. Yeah, once I'm entered into these, when I have to enter a certain contest to demo something on stream, I always feel like it's cursed to withdraw from the contest. Like I would have had the nuts if I withdrew, but definitely a weird Jordan superstition and not something that's based on data at all. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into this. Okay, so now let's close FanDuel to just do this full circle. So now you're entering lineups, right? And it's maybe 7 o'clock and you're getting into this here. So what do? Right? So first of all, you want to make sure you're on the right slate. So we'll do the main slate first, and you go to the entry editor and it's going to say download your entries file from FanDuel. So we click this, it's going to take you to the upcoming tab. And this is where it gets a little tricky on FanDuel because DraftKings makes it very easy. We can just query them directly and just go get the exact file we need and then download it to your computer. FanDuel, you have to do this yourself. So just remember, you need to make sure you're downloading the file for the right slate. Don't get confused. We're doing the main slate first. So we'll download the main slate first. So CSV edit, you click the little CSV edit button in the section that applies to the slate you're looking at. Download CSV. You save it. And you can see that little spin thing went up here and then just drag it and drop it in. So you can see for the main slate, playing small volume, handful of contests, right? And now I'm going to enter my lineups, right? So in this case, the way I've been playing this particular contest mix is I've been doing a ranked fill here, and we'll just do this. So I just need 150 lineups. If you are interested too in playing 150 lineups, it's something I've always liked. I just enjoy knowing. I like knowing that I have 150 lineups. I like playing with the exposures of 150 lineups. The FanDuel 5-cent contest is huge, right? It's very hard to win, but it's going to be a very high ROI contest because there's 250,000 people in it, right? And it's 150 max. I've been playing this recently just because I think it's fun to have 150 lineups, and the mini max on the NBA side doesn't really fit our contest selection principles. I'm not going to play 150 in like the huge big flagship contests. Those aren't great contests by our metrics either. But this piggy bank shot at least just gives you the satisfaction of having the 150 in there. Definitely recommend checking that out if you play at the low stakes and want to build 150. But anyway, so we'll fill rank and we'll get this and then we'll download our entries. And I normally just leave this up in a separate tab because then it makes it very easy to just come right back here. You pick the file that we just downloaded, right? And edit 174 entries. Okay, so now we're in. Okay, so I'm going to close this again because I want to do now the whole thing, right? So now we're going to go to the express slate. So we have to switch our slate in SaberSim. and it's going to say, let's do it all over again. So now download template file from FanDuel. This is going to take a second to load because now it's going to load probably 150 unique lineups, which is something that has always kind of, I don't know exactly why FanDuel does it this way, especially considering that their CSV edit buttons are only available on this page. I don't even play that many unique lineups, but I know for those of you out there that are playing it like a ton of volume on FanDuel, this has got to be the most annoying thing in the world. Okay, so now another way to get confused, right? It's all of these are the unique lineups for the 7 p.m. main slate, and they all have the CSV edit button. We need to go get the 7:30 main slate lineup, which is going to be down here at the bottom, and click CSV edit here. Since I'm only playing one lineup, I could have obviously just edited this here on the app, but we'll do it with the entry editor. So again, we're going to save the file, and we go back here. And we do this. Okay, so now our lineup's in. Let's build a lineup for it. It's a single entry. It's under 1,000. We don't need 500 different lineups. And we'll get this one in here. So we'll let this build for a second here. Okay, so our lineup's in. We're looking good. Feeling happy with that. Fill contest with lineups. Doesn't matter if we do rank or unique because we just have one lineup here. Download entries. Go back to FanDuel and upload it. Edit one entry, and we're in business. So we're looking good. We're looking good. We're feeling good. Our lineups are in. There you go. So definitely the things you can mess up on FanDuel just because it's not completely automated for you. Make sure you're on the right slate on FanDuel, right? Building lineups for the right slate here. Make sure you are downloading the CSV file that corresponds to the slate you expect. Just keep an eye out. Just pay attention. And that is the easiest way to do it. On DraftKings, again, we handle all this for you because clicking that download template file from DraftKings just goes directly there and downloads the right entry file for the right slate. Little more things to watch out for here on the FanDuel side. But all right, cool. Let's see. All right, question from Nikhil here. And he said, let's get into this one. I know you've spoken about ownership projections before, specifically for NFL. When I look at the projections, sometimes I get the feeling that these numbers hint at what the field should be doing optimally and don't necessarily reflect reality. I appreciate the fact that we can add a ton of value by dialing in ownership, but is there a plan to bake in some sort of historical data from a slate so the projections can somewhat mirror what the field is actually going to do? Of course, this would require specific slate scenarios to be considered, like backup value running backs getting a ton of ownership due to injuries. Okay, so a lot to unpack here. I'm going to start by saying this. I want to say this first. We are aware that the ownership projections, we really think of the ownership projections as probably one of the weaker points of our product at the moment. And we're aware of that. We spent some time before the start of NBA and NFL to improve it for this season, especially by taking into account other sources of projection. And I think the ownership projections are as good as they have ever been. But we want to continue to improve there. And I know there are things to be improved. So it is on our radar to continue to improve things. The note that what our ownership projections are actually projecting is what the field is, what is optimal to do is pretty sharp. The reason for that is because what we are doing is we are basically taking an aggregate projection and then building thousands of lineups at high variance settings and then using the exposures of players in that set of lineups as the ownership projections. So yes, in many ways, we are projecting what would be optimal for the field to do as opposed to what they might actually do. That's why you get that sense. And I think that's like very sharp that you picked up on that. The problem here, so I don't actually think the way that we will go about improving this here is via historical data. I don't know if that's necessarily the right approach, but I do think having some kind of human touch here to help support these might be a good idea. It's a double-edged sword because when you start, what we always say, and we've talked about this a lot on our model streams, that when we have Matt and Will come on and talk about the model, is that computer trying to approximate the way a human or a group of humans is going to approach a problem or something is difficult for a computer to do. But as soon as you introduce the human touch there, you also introduce human bias, which can be a good thing for projecting ownership. But it can be, a little tricky there as well, right? Like your individual bias of how often the field might do something doesn't necessarily get you closer. The other problem too, and I think just a problem space of ownership projection in general, is that there's a little bit of like this natural randomness or chaos with ownership projections that I think is really interesting. Like the Sony Michel example is a perfect example of why projecting ownership is very hard. I don't think once we had the weird halfway Darrell Henderson news that he was active but might not play that much, like at that point, the Sony Michel ownership projection was almost a black box, right? He was a great play projected wise. He ended up doing very well. And if you played him, you got him at way lower ownership than probably anybody else projected around the industry, at least at the lower stakes, right? Because everybody got off him, but that isn't, I don't know if that's something anybody necessarily could have predicted, right? Like maybe you would have gotten lucky. Maybe you got that the right way, but the next time you get a similar result, right? Maybe you get that the wrong way. So it's tough, but we do want to spend a little bit more time on it. I know ownership it's important. And as this ownership fade slider gets higher in certain contests, right? It becomes increasingly important to be accurate there. I do think most of the time we actually do end up directionally accurate, which means that the ownership fade slider works, right? The ownership fade slider basically compares players' ownership projection to their averages, to the average at the position, which means as long as you're directionally accurate on most of these players, in other words, you can identify the players that are going to be higher owned than average, even if you're off on the magnitude of the ownership projections at times, the ownership fade slider is still going to work, but it is something that we want to spend some time and improve. So Marcus does offer up to like combine some of our ownership projections with maybe some of our competitors. I think that's fine. I do, and maybe this isn't realistic to ask, especially if you're a little less familiar with these sports or sites or whatever, or haven't been playing DFS for as long, but I really do think that you can spend some time watching videos on, like I watch a lot of these videos on YouTube, like Al Seidenfeld and Sal Vetri and Joe Holka and even some of our competitors like live before lock shows and stuff like that. And you can get a sense of what the best plays are. And again, I don't, Nikhil even mentioned it here and he took the words out of my mouth because I always come on here and say that you can add value by adjusting ownership projections. But I think most of the time that there are these slates where there's really a handful of players that the slate kind of revolves around. And as long as you can identify them and make sure that they are projected high, that's really the high value move, right? We're not asking anybody to go in here and look at every single player on the slate. But you can kind of quickly identify those plays that are off, or that maybe need a little bit of a bump. So, there was an example last week. It was the Giannis slate, right? The ownership projections for the slate where Giannis got ruled out 5 minutes before lock did not update in time for lock. They didn't get there, right? And I think it's yes, you could go through and look at the NBA projections for ownership for the entire slate and make an adjustment and see where there's inefficiencies on every single player. But I think the most important high value thing you could have done 5 minutes, 10 minutes before lock when Giannis got ruled out is just jack up the ownership projections on Middleton and Holiday and Portis, who are going to get in. I put them all at 30%. I just said that's good enough. And that got me there, right? That like, I had a ton of exposure to all of them, but at least I was able to say to the builder with 10 minutes before lock, these guys are going to be highly owned. And that's kind of what that worked there. But anyway, wrapping up, we know that there is work to be done here and it's on our radar. So, but good question. Another good one there. Question from Luke here. He said, if I just want to do QB plus one stacks, I assume that's like a one run back, and SaberSim keeps giving me other stacks, should I just drop the correlation slider down? I wouldn't do that. I would set a stacking rule for it. So we actually added these advanced stacking rules this season. So you can now very rigorously control. If you know that you only want a certain stack size, you can rigorously control this. So I guess let me say this. The first way you can do this, right, is just editing it in your exposures. And that's actually probably the easiest way to do it. Right. And what's nice about doing it this way is if you just build these lineups, right, is that you get the opportunity to at least kind of check yourself, right? Maybe because of the certain state of the slate, it doesn't make sense to use a lot of QB plus one with one run back, right? A lot of times those slates where you get a lot of QB plus one with one run back are slates where there are a lot of different viable games. There are a lot of games with high totals. It becomes difficult when you combine our simulations with the correlation and ownership fade slider to effectively build lineups that the builder wants to use that are like QB plus threes and QB plus twos and so on. So you get like these skinny stacks. When there are slates more where there are less games like that, right? A lot of times you get the bigger stacks of individual games on a slate. But like very, very simple approach here would be, you could do this a couple different ways, but the easiest way would be to just go QB plus one with one run back and set the minimum exposure to 100. And then from there, you're just in business, right? Boom. Every stack is a QB plus one with one run back. The caveat to that, right, is that we have eliminated a ton of lineups from our pool now at this point. So if we were to go in and start editing player exposures and things like that, we're probably going to butt up against the limit quickly of how many lineups are available. So probably the proper way of doing this, if you know for a fact with no exceptions, you only want these kinds of lineups in your pool, would be to set an advanced stacking rule. So you go to the stacking tab, you switch the toggle to advanced, add advanced rule, click edit positions. And for every single lineup, you want a QB, one QB, right? I'm going to assume you want running back, wide receiver, tight end here as the run back, but if you didn't, right, I'm going to say equal to one, but if you wanted running wide receiver or tight end, you can do that, or just running back and wide receiver, whatever, you can do that instead. And then we want the run back, right? So the opposing team. And for the opposing team, running backs on opposing teams are generally negatively correlated, so I would recommend taking it this way instead, wide receiver or tight end, making sure we have that one run back here. You can even choose what teams are included in this if you want. I typically leave that alone when I use these. Can rename this, which is kind of nice. So we can call this our QB plus one main stack. If you're adding a bunch of different stacking rules or even just any additional stacking rules, it can be useful to name them so that you can see them clearly next to each other. But and then from there, click Start New Build. And this will make sure your entire pool of 500 lineups is built the way you want. So the build sometimes can take just a bit longer doing this here because now there's a limitation on the lineups that the builder can use. But we'll let this finish just so I can show you that this indeed built 500 lineups to spec here. So. All right. $500 lineups. They're all QB plus one plus with one run back. And even if we expand to see the full pool of 500, they are all QB plus one with one run back. So we're in business. Looking good. That is how you do that. Last note on this, don't turn correlation slider down even if you set these stacking rules. What the correlation slider is going to do is it's going to, now that you've set a stacking rule, it's going to make sure that you're still using the players that are highly correlated both in your stack and outside of your stack, right? So like, let's see if we can find a lineup here that, okay, so like we have this lineup here with Stafford and Cup and Chenault, right? So when this lineup gets constructed, we use Cup, right? Like you can see Cup's biggest correlations are with Stafford and Chenault. Stafford's biggest correlations are with Cup, and on the Jaguars run back side, his biggest positive correlation is with Chenault. So it's making sure that while following the stacking rule, it's using the most correlated combinations of players, but it's also going to make sure that you get other correlations built into the lineups. So we see in this particular case, Leonard Fournette has a positive correlation with his own defense. That's a common correlation. And I actually think it looks like Jamal Williams might be a little, very, very slightly. This is actually probably just pure luck, but very slightly correlated with Justin Jefferson in the rest of the lineup. So you allow those other little mini correlations to show up by doing it this way. So don't turn your correlation slider down just because you've set a stack rule. But I just saw this comment come in from Six. Welcome to your first office hours stream. I do have your question on my radar, so we will get to it here. Just wrapping up some of the other questions here that came in Slack beforehand, but I will get to your question about the small field strategy. So welcome. Thanks for tuning in. But okay. There was a quick question here from Gerard here. He said, how do you get more lineups beyond the 1,500 pool? You unfortunately cannot. You are capped at the 1,500 lineups. Ends up just becoming kind of technically challenging to make that bigger, especially assuming that everybody building lineups on a NFL Sunday, for example, we're building more than 1,500. So also generally, the biggest reason why you would want to do that, I think, would be because you are running into exposure limits. You are getting the message that you need to build more lineups when you're editing your lineups, even with 1,500. When that is the case, or if that is the case, my recommendation would be to go back to step one and make more projection adjustments. If you are building 1,500 lineups and via editing exposure still seeing a message that you need to build more lineups, you at that point are basically just disagreeing with what's in there as a projection, flatly disagreeing with it. And I would definitely recommend at that point going back and adjusting projections to bump the guys you like, lower the guys you don't like. So okay. So Luke's different kind of question here. I should have used NHL as an example. If I do a power line with 3 and 3 strength stacks, SaberSim doesn't just give me 3 stacks. Yeah, NHL is a little trickier because we don't have that advanced stacking rule where you can set exactly, right? So on NHL, your stacks say at least 3 players. So if you do this is a common rule, right? At least 3 and at least 3, right? Well, you could get a 4-3 here in this particular case. You could even get a 6 stack because you could get 3 players from line 1 and 3 players from line 2 on the same team. The best advice I can give is if you are Okay, so you have a couple options. The first is to set an additional stacking rule to limit this further and say something like, okay, so at least 3 players from the same even strength line and at least 3 players from the same even strength line, no more than 3 players from the same team, right? Which would remove those 5s or 6 types lineups from showing up. And also something like no more than 3 players from the same even strength line, right? And that's going to build lineups that will get you a little bit closer than what you're looking at. What I would recommend, though, that is probably a little bit more appropriate in this case would be to just set the raw rules that get you close. That's something like this. And then use the exposure settings on step 3 to kind of quality control and eliminate certain combinations from your pool. And I think that's probably a better approach. So if you're running into issues where you're not getting the kinds of lineups you want at all, setting those rules, set the ones that I was talking about. No more than 3 players from the same even strength line. No more than 3 players from the same team or something like that. But this should get you a lot closer. And again, it's going to take a little bit because we've set 2 stacking rules, or it's going to take a little bit longer. But we should get a lot closer to what we're looking at here. And let's say we were looking at like 40 lineups. We don't even have any of those 6 or 5-man stacks, but we could eliminate some of these 4-mans even at this point. So I know. So I don't play a ton of NHL, but it's become pretty clear to me doing this stream that this is another one of those sports where a very tight control over what stacking constructions is important and is something that a lot of you guys are looking for. So I think I would hope that we can add the advanced stacking tab here in NHL, just like we do for NFL, to allow a little bit more like rigorous control over what gets included here. Because there's commonly a lot of questions here that come up. I don't know. They come up and it's difficult to say exactly how to do that. So, but anyway. Okay, cool. So I'm going to jump to this question here. This is from 6 in chat here. But it came in through email. So we'll answer this first, and then we'll get to the other questions that came in live here. We will get to everything here today. So if you've asked a question, haven't gotten to it yet, I promise it's coming. But question says, I typically play single entry, small field GPPs, less than 1,000 people with a lot of sharp players. I'm curious some roster building, general lineup construction tips to approaching those types of tournaments in your opinion. I consume a lot of content and study quite a bit, but the field is so sharp these days. And when you couple that with standard NFL variants, makes things tough at times. So always looking for an edge as far as game theory, etc. Thanks in advance. Really good question here. So let's go ahead. Let's jump over to NFL here. The very first thing I always, like to do, especially playing a contest type or contest structure that's a little bit different than what I normally do, is actually go in here and look and see what we're getting, like in terms of sliders, right? Because what can be really useful for this, and like for a typical NFL contest, maybe of this type, you could pick either of these based on the question here, but we'll pick the bigger one. What's nice about this here, or what's a strength of this, is that we've back tested these sliders by building thousands of lineups at every single combination. It's not just an educated guess, is what I always like to say. And you can sometimes kind of use both literally visually looking at the sliders and seeing what they're saying, but also the lineups you're getting out of them as a way to kind of actually identify the optimal strategy for the contest, right? And there's a few things that I've kind of learned from this, or as I was preparing for this question, just thought about here in terms of optimal strategy. And the first is that correlation is high. It's higher than it is for other contests like multi-entry stuff by just a tad. But it also is relatively higher compared to the sim variance slider, right? Correlation becomes our most important factor here. And ownership fade ends up coming down pretty significantly. It's 1 at this particular slider setting. It's off at this one. And those are the first 2 things I noticed. So let's build some lineups here, and I'll talk about a few other, like basically the net effect of that, at least from my perspective. While this is building, I wanted to mention one other thing that I've noticed with these kinds of contests in general, with single entry contests, even at the higher stakes, is you have a lot of people that end up approaching these contests not even really as GPPs. You get people throwing cash lineups in. You get people playing just very safely in general. You even, I think, sometimes get people that just aren't even bothering to stack. Even high stakes players that are just looking to get additional action down on their cash lineup will enter lineups into these contests. That combined with a sharper field overall, playing at higher stakes, you mentioned here a lot of sharp players, you are going to get a significant ownership condensing on what is perceived to be the best overall plays on the slate, right? If you are getting 65% Sony Michel in multi-entry stuff, which we didn't, you're getting 80% in these contests. And if you're getting 25% Antonio Gibson in large field multi-entry stuff, you're getting 55% of him in these contests, etc. So I think what that means really is that it's not so much ownership matters less. It's that you get an ownership edge much more quicker by being off of any of the highly owned plays, right? You're able to find an ownership edge, I think, quicker because the lack of any chalky player showing up in the lineup gives you a roster construction edge in contests that are this small. The other factor of that was the correlation side of things, right? You are going to get, when you build lineups with SaberSim optimized for these particular contests, you are going to get stacks in general that are probably, and actually you're not only going to get stacks, you're going to get bigger stacks, but your bigger stacks are going to be floated to the top of your pool more readily because finding the precise optimal is less important, and being right on the highest scoring team, for example, gets you further into the contest. So I would say be comfortable with playing bigger stacks in these kinds of single entry contests, these high stakes, lower field size contests, because it is enough to sometimes say that you are on the Bucks or Rams or whoever else might be the team showing up in these big three-way stacks, and just having that team be the highest scoring team, even if you are missing the three optimal receivers that are all spread out across different random teams that, all went off that you need for the larger field stuff. So those are the two things that really pop into my mind here when I'm kind of thinking about my strategy for approaching like single entry, especially small field in NFL, is be willing to embrace, even in baseball, actually, really, which is another sport, like similar like variance and correlation kind of matrix there, is embrace bigger stacks, embrace higher correlative lineups, even if you are, potentially sacrificing maybe a little bit in terms of the maximum upside of that lineup. And your need to differentiate with ownership comes down quite a bit on a per player basis. And you can get an edge by simply just like really even just having one or two pivots off of the best plays, right? So like even in this lineup, right, we have the chalky Buck stacks, we have the chalky Michelle, but the play like maybe Renfro in this particular lineup, if he's 10% in large field, he's going to be much lower here. And the play that's missing here, at least in terms of like the chalkiest plays on the slate, is Cooper Kupp, right? So that this construction is going to be pretty varied if you're only competing against 800 lineups. And it's not necessarily the case for every single lineup, but like this is a good lineup. We differentiate in an 800 person field. You are going to pretty significantly differentiate your Michelle and Kupp by stacking it with the quarterback and also a third piece. Not to mention the Jets defense, but right. What is a very small edge in a large field thing, large field multi-entry contest, is actually going to be quite a bit of a bigger edge in the single entry contest. So with all that said, my approach to contest selection in general, and actually what we generally recommend, is a lot more of a wider approach. I just mentioned at the start of the stream that my contest selection mix is much more of the 150 max, spread out as wide as possible, and think more from the standpoint of exposures rather than that single lineup. Or even if you're playing a handful of these, like, right, 3 to 5 lineups or something like that spread out amongst these contests. I come from the background of playing a lot more lineups. So, but that is my recommendation. That's my approach overall. So, but let me know if you have any other follow-up questions there. Happy to talk about this a little bit more. For now, I'm going to move us along, but good question. And I do think the lesson of I am branching out, or not even branching out, right? I have a question about a particular sport or contest structure or size or something like that. Using the sliders, knowing where they come from, knowing that they're data-driven and back-tested as a way to kind of learn at least the theory of how you should be approaching that, is, I think, can be really useful. Because again, these we spend a lot of time setting these where we do, and they're not necessarily, the rule of law or anything like that, but they can teach us things, especially thinking about it in relative terms, right? Like you can almost kind of say the most important thing we can do if we're playing 150 lineups in the mini max, right, is embrace the natural variance of that contest, right? And for these particular contests, right, the most relatively important component of the lineup construction is correlation here, relatively speaking. So I think that can be a pretty cool tool. But cool. Let's go ahead. We'll hit the questions that have come in live here at the start of the stream. Thank you for everybody that has been kind of patiently waiting here. That's why I always mention getting these questions in as quickly as possible. Jack said, for large field, GPPs, NFL and NBA, would you suggest including chalky plays into your group of players, or have a group of players without chalky players and let the chalky plays fall in as they may? I'm a little confused on what you mean in terms of group of players. I don't, in general, I don't really remove any particular players from my pool in most sports. I sometimes do a little bit of trimming off the bottom of the pool and just remove all players under a certain projection. But I'm a little confused on what you actually mean here in terms of like including chalky plays into your group of players. I leave everybody in at a starting point. And I will allow like the sliders to kind of guide me into lineup constructions that make sense for the contest I'm playing. So, if I was playing, I guess even the pooch punt, right? You're building your pooch punt lineups for the weekly max challenge, right? The variance is going to get cranked all the way up to 10. The ownership fade is going to be at 4, right? You're going to build lineups with combinations of players, combinations of ownership projections that make sense for the contest you're playing. If there are chalky players showing up in this particular lineup, they're probably going to be often either, they're going to be paired with other players with lower ownership or used in a way that differentiates them where they're correlated with the rest of the lineup or something like that. We just saw from a single entry, ownership fade is going to come down to like 1 or 0. Sim variance is going to handle a lot of your differentiation at that particular point. You may have lineups that are most of the chalky best projected plays with 1 or 2 pivots. So it's contest specific as well. But I don't really like to start my process, and I would generally recommend to leave most of the players in the pool because the lineups that we are building are going to be optimized for the contest that you're playing in terms of ownership or whatever, right? So you can see, like, yeah, we have very chalky. So this is, again, for a 150 max, 50,000 person contest, right? Basically the biggest contest you can play, right? Like we have some chalkier plays peeking through. But the Cooper Cup is correlated to the rest of the Ram stack in here. We have some extremely lower owned plays showing up as well, or some much lower owned plays, right? You can see in this kind of lineup too. Not even really any. Well, with Jonathan Taylor's like fairly chalky play. But the rest of the lineup here has quite a bit of lower ownership, right? You're going to get lineups that are kind of built for the right contest. And this is true for NBA too. NBA, lower variance sport, lower need for ownership fade. You'll get chalkier lineups in general. But I am typically, willing to play chalk in my lineups, right? I'm not the type to just fade the chalk completely, and I don't think you really ever really can. There's not really a contest where it ever really makes a lot of sense to do that. Maybe in a sport like baseball, but let me know too, Jack, if I'm misunderstanding your question. Might have understood this the wrong way. So, but for now, I'm going to move us along. Let's see. Okay, so Matt says, how about stacks for NFL showdowns? Can it be advantageous to throw a stacking rule in there or let the high sim variance just take care of any potential correlations with the sims? Yeah, I would highly recommend not setting rules for NFL showdown. The main reason why, and again, I probably also would recommend not playing showdown on FanDuel. It's just, I think, very hard to be profitable. If you can play on DraftKings, play on DraftKings for NFL showdown, right? The main reason why you don't need to set a stack is because when sim variance is at 10, right? Maximum sim variance, we're using individual game sims to build each individual lineup anyway. So the correlation, the correlate, Josh Allen is correlated with Diggs, right? If you roll a game sim where Josh Allen has a big game, Diggs will be used in that lineup if he also has a big game. He might not if he doesn't, but you don't need to set a rule to capture that correlation. You do that's actually, let me say this. That's also why the correlation slider is just completely off, because the correlation of the lineup is already naturally handled within the sims. Now, the reason why it's on in the NFL main slate is because there's a lot of games on the slate. And if you just use an individual game sim for every game on the slate without having a correlation factor or without having a stacking rule, you're going to have a lot of lineups that aren't correlated at all, because there's almost always, if you have a QB that has a big game in his individual game sim, it's very likely that there's some other wide receiver apart from his highest scoring wide receiver somewhere else on the slate that had the highest scoring result. So you want to have that correlation factor in there to get stacks and things like that. But for single game, you don't need it. And in fact, I think people using traditional tools where you basically have to set some of these rules in order to build lineups that make kind of some sense, I actually think are probably making like mistakes more often than not, or not necessarily roster construction mistakes, but they're making duplication mistakes, right? The people saying, if use Stephon Diggs, Josh Allen has to be somewhere else in the lineup are just begging to be duplicated, right? And like Showdown, and we've talked about it time and time again on this stream, one of the most important things you can do in Showdown is reducing your dupes in the contest. And some of that is by willingly eating a little bit of negative correlation, or let's do something like this. Or even just not including the obvious positive correlation in the individual lineup because all you're doing is capitalizing for an individual game sim, right? Like last night, Javonte Williams, captain with Chiefs defense was the optimal. Those two players are negatively correlated, right? But if you had set some kind of rule to try to capitalize on the average correlation, you would have maybe eliminated that lineup from your pool, first of all, but also made lineups that are much more duplicated in general, because that's what the field is going to do. So let's just look at this, right? Surely we'll find a lineup that is somehow weird here relatively quickly. Here's a good one, right? Josh Allen with the Patriots defense in the lineup, right? There's a game sim backing up this particular lineup. There's a game simulation in our base of sims that this lineup is represented by. But you include two players that are heavily negatively correlated, right? And that's okay. So I'd avoid the stacking rules here. Again, you see, right? Most of the lineups where Josh Allen's included is you get these pass catchers showing up somewhere else in the lineup because, again, Josh Allen, to have his ceiling outcome, probably needs to throw to the ball to somebody most of the time, right? Maybe not as much as some other quarterbacks out there with his running ability, but probably but in this case, it's Breida and Dawson Knox, right? This is the optimal for a game sim. Josh Allen plus one of his wide receivers in every single lineup. Whoops, this lineup is now not possible. You can't build this lineup, So I think those rules can really throw you off. But Matt said, figure, just wanted to make sure. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you asked that question because I actually think, we're probably getting an edge against a lot of these people that are otherwise still sharp players, but are using an optimizer that has no way of comprehending correlation really on its own and are really left with the only option of creating rules like this, right? To kind of try to capture some correlation because you don't literally have ready-made optimals for certain game scripts in front of you en masse, 1,500 at a time if you want them, right? And I think there's an edge there. So, cool. Joseph says, any plans to project minutes per game in NBA? We do project minutes at the moment. So if you go to NBA, we do actually have minutes projections. There's a column for minutes. If it's missing for you, check this little table icon here and make sure the column is checked in. But this is the average minutes we have for the player per game. We actually have variance of our minutes too in general, which is really, really cool. What that means is that, like, when we say we're simulating these games and we simulate the Nuggets game to project Jokic's average outcome, right? He does not play 33 minutes in every single game sim we have for the game, right? There's actually natural variance of how many minutes he gets, which makes the projecting his game outcomes much more accurate, right? So yeah, that's already there. But Cody asked if there's been any news on the idea of unclicking D for utility. I unfortunately don't have news there. It's something it's in our queue, and I'll double check on it. But yeah, we've been really focused on a few other projects recently. So AJ says, can you break down rules that we should create and use on an everyday basis for NBA/NFL? AJ, I'm going to blow your mind here, maybe, and say none. I'm going to say there are no rules that you have to set on an everyday basis. And the reason why, we'll start here. We'll do NFL because I think it's a little bit easier to visualize, right? So SaberSim's approach to building lineups is very different than a traditional tool. A traditional optimizer is going to purely just optimize based on average projection for players. And then you, out of necessity, have to start creating rules. Otherwise, you're just going to build cash lineups, right? You're going to build lineups that have no eye towards ownership. You're not going to build lineups that are correlated. If you don't set any kind of like randomness or exposure settings, you're going to end up with 100% exposure to the best average projected plays on the slate. All of that stuff is bad, right? That's not how we win GPPs. With SaberSim, because we have simulated every single game on the slate play-by-play thousands of times, we know a lot of things. First of all, we know precisely how correlated other players in the game are correlated to other players playing in the game. We also understand what a player's full range of outcomes looks like, what their upside potential is, and how often they get there. And when you build your lineups with SaberSim, we leverage this information in a way that is properly optimized for the contest you tell us you're playing. So it's different if you tell us you're playing a 500-person single entry versus if you are playing the minimax, right? When you build lineups with SaberSim, you are going to get GPP-ready lineups that are optimized for your particular contest. So I did not set a single rule. This is for a 20 max over 50K. Maybe this is the first down, the $1 or the quarter jukebox or something like that. And you will see right off the bat, we will get appropriate exposure to different players without having to set exposure limits or randomness. We are going to get stacks of certain teams and games and correlated players without having to set stacking rules. And we are going to get lineups that at least consider ownership and do not just jam in the highest projected owned plays and mix in some lower owned plays here without having to set a single rule. This is basically kind of the elevator pitch of SaberSim, but it all starts with the facts that we have those game simulations to use instead of having to kind of come up with some of this stuff intuitively. So let's look at what these lineups look like here. So there is a DraftKings message. We have to make 2 changes. So I'll just make 2 minor changes real quickly, but you can see we can click on stack types, right? And we are getting lineups here that have stacks in them. Now you can quality control this and make improvements. Maybe you don't want a QB +4, right? Now, if you wanted, if you were ever going to use a QB +4, it'd probably be with like a Stafford Ram stack or maybe the Bucks, but you can remove these kinds of lineups here in step 3 and quality control this and tighten this up. But you can see in general, we're getting the kinds of lineups that we want for this particular contest. We have some low-owned plays mixed in here. We have lineups that are correlated, that have the stacks. Our exposures to certain players is not out of control, right? We have appropriate exposures to different players on the slate. So, original question here. What are the rules that I should be using every single day for different sport? You literally do not need to put any in. You can add stacking rules if you have certain requirements of the lineup constructions you want to use. But in general, actually, I should probably say this because I didn't really say this. The only rule that you need to say is to just pick the drop downs that correspond to the contest you're building lineups for. Everything else will generally default to what we think makes sense for the contest. So, but good question. Reginald says, how can we get more exposure to players that your software is not high on? For example, I tried to get to Kittle, but every time I tried, I kept getting the build more lineups message. Yeah. So if you are getting that, right, again, that generally means that if you are building 1,500 lineups and you're making a bunch of edits to exposures and then seeing a message that says we can't meet all these exposure requirements, there are not 150 lineups in our pool of 1,500 that meet your exposure requirements. The best thing to do in that case is to jump back to step 1 and make some adjustments here so that we can build a set of lineups that better matches what you are trying to accomplish. If you have a sense of just how much exposure you want, a very easy thing to do is just set a minimum exposure here and just say, I want 25% George Kittle. So you've set that minimum exposure here, and now we'll make sure 25% of your lineups have Kittle. And you can do this for as many players as you want. If you have less of a general sense of how much exposure that you want precisely and more have a sense that we are just under on a player and you want more, a very easy thing to do is to bump the player's projection instead. So say, you know what, like I don't like 15.52 as a, let's see, like what do the tight end projections look like? So maybe you were approaching this thinking like, you know what, I actually think Kittle is far and away the best tight end on the slate, not slightly a little bit higher than Gronk, right? And maybe you bump his projection to 18, which will shift all of the simulations we have for the 49ers game and shift Kittle's output in those individual simulations and give you more Kittle exposure organically, or at least give you more lineups that include Kittle to begin with. So a couple different options. The exposure setting a min or max exposure before the build is more of kind of a precise, like, I want this much. The projections is a little bit more of like I think he's under projected. I want more, but I'm not as opinionated on how much exposure I get to him. I think his projection's low or something like that. That's the easiest way to do it. And if you are running into that issue of seeing the message about lineups on step 3, go back to step 1 and make some adjustments there. So. All right. Cool. We've been at this here for about an hour and 10 minutes. Been a good stream. Talked about all kinds of different stuff. Stacking rules, other rules in general, small field strategy. What else do we talk about? Managing ownership and chalk in general. Rank versus unique fill. Of course, we did the giveaways and the weekly max challenge winners. I think we'll go ahead. Oh, let's go ahead. We'll make this question from Joseph our last question of the day here, and then of course we will be back tomorrow. But Joseph says, if you adjust step 1 projection, oh, good question. If you adjust step 1 projections, does it also adjust in previous builds? It does not. The builds themselves are the projections that you have when you start a build kind of end up getting siloed and locked in and just are what they are. Of course, they will update if you click the refresh button or come back to them later. Wait, now I'm being confusing. Any custom projections that you set for an individual build are kind of siloed and just are what they are for that build. If you go back to step 1 and change your custom projections, we won't change what they were, where they are in that individual build. If you're using SaberSim projections, they can update if the projections to those players change, but your custom projections won't change in an individual build if you go back and change them on step 1. And in fact, even if you go back to the build and click the refresh icon, they're actually still not going to update. So if you change your custom projections in step 1, you need to do a new build. So good question. Let's leave it there. I will be back here again tomorrow, 2 p.m. Eastern, same time, same place. So come back if you play NFL Showdown, NBA DFS, NHL tonight, have some questions. Email us, support@sabersim.com, or pop them into the Office Hours channel in Slack, or come join me live here on YouTube again tomorrow and ask them in our YouTube chat. Until then, good luck in your contests tonight. Have a good rest of your Monday, and I will see you guys tomorrow. See ya.